Cheers. My name is Eric Skeens. I'm the CTO and co-founder over at 3Tree Tech. So I titled this Making the Network Cloudy because of where the enterprise organizations are going today. 3Tree Tech as an organization is that we've grown out of a change within the distribution model for technology. We refer to ourselves as technology scouts, and that's because of the way that we approach technology and bring that into the Fortune 1000, the Global 2000 companies and enterprises across the globe. And my business partner, Bob Kingery, who's a serial entrepreneur, was one of the second shareholders of a fairly large CLEC known as XO Communications here in the United States. And eventually, eventually that was sold off, and now it's part of Verizon. It's I think it was a $2 billion acquisition for Verizon to acquire those assets in order to feed into all of their towers from a 5G perspective and kind of bolster that network. And so Bob saw a change in the landscape for distribution of technology into the enterprise market or into the market in general, and wanted to capitalize on that component and bring our organization, which is 3Tree Tech, that was kind of born out of the LEC and the carrier world, as well as the VAR world, and taken on a hybrid model of where we are able to not be beholden to any specific technology or any specific tech giant such as Cisco, HP, IBM, the three big carriers, the Verizons, the AT&Ts of the world, or the Tatas of the world. But we have the capability of being nimble and bringing differentiated and disruptive technology to the market and to the enterprise, to the enterprises, the Fortune 1000, Global 2000 market. And so what that's afforded us is the ability to bring innovative and creative solutions, which is where this talk has come out of. This model and this strategy around being able to enable a multi-cloud strategy into the enterprise came out of talks with a few Fortune 1000 customers of ours, where we had some very innovative CIOs and CTOs that took a different approach. They started to decouple themselves from those large tech giants and decouple themselves from those large carriers and build a very flexible, nimble model across their organization. The problem that we're finding in the enterprise today is that the way that an individual or an organization reach their applications has changed significantly, where you've got all of your applications living in, whether it's a cloud, whether it's in Microsoft Azure, AWS, GCP or Google Cloud, whether it's in Alibaba, what have you, or Oracle or SAP from an application perspective. So you have SaaS applications that you're trying to reach, or you have a private cloud or a data center that you house some of your applications because of the fact that they can't live in a native cloud. This becomes inherently problematic because of the legacy infrastructure that has been built over the last 25 years of old antiquated networks, old antiquated data center architecture, everything being housed within four walls, leveraging MPLS. Previous to that, frame relay prior to the MPLS world. And so when we look at this problem, we've got to be able to figure out, okay, how do we get to all of these applications without having to lengthen the cycle of build time, lengthen the cycle of acquiring technology, procuring different technology. And so when we jump into that, there's 3 areas where you have to account for. The first is where your WAN router is today, which is essentially what you're looking at right here, which is a brick, when you start looking into a cloud model. The other component is your data center. Data centers are beginning to close down. They're going out of business. I've got a customer here in Portland, Oregon. Their data center had shut down, and they gave them a 3-month notice. And it was their primary data center where they had all of their applications, all their proprietary applications built out and sitting within there. They had a secondary data center for DR and backup. But this primary data center said, you have 3 months to move out. We're shutting our doors. And we've been seeing that this happen across the globe, across the country here in the US, quite frequently, where a lot of these companies or these data centers are starting to either shut down or be acquired by much larger organizations that have a different strategy around data center rather than just rack space, power and cooling. And so we've seen this happen significantly across the board. The other piece is your firewall. The firewall that you've known, that the Cisco ASAs, if you have a Cisco ASA in place, or if you have an old Palo Alto in place, if you've got Dell SecureWorks, if you have WatchGuards, you name the firewall of the past. These firewalls can't get you to the cloud because they don't have that capability. And so there's been a lot of bolt-ons to these antiquated hardware firewalls, these stateful firewalls that sit out at the edge to allow you access into the cloud. But again, it becomes a bolt-on, and you just hope that it integrates. And then you also have to have folks that know how to integrate this, that are not necessarily network security, but now you're looking at data center security or cloud-based security, and being able to integrate that into your organization. So as you're trying to reach for that, there's this gap that you've got to this gap that you have to close across the board. So before I jump into some of the solution component, I want to walk back and kind of dig in a little bit deeper into where we came from and why it's problematic, and get into why it's problematic of what we're trying to achieve within a cloud first world, and being able to provide your network into that cloud. So I'm going to start off, and the reason why I have this is 1993. In the United States, President Bill Clinton was the president at that time, and was started his presidency in 1993. Jurassic Park came out. Ireland won Eurovision, controversial win for the Champions League with Marseille in 1993. And then the last thing that occurred was Cisco rocked the business world and the enterprise world by coming out with their 2500 series router that changed the way that data moved in and out of an organization. But the component that hasn't changed, so that's when it started, in 1993, but there hasn't been a lot of innovation since then within the route switch world. In 2004, they came out with the ISR Gen 1 family within Cisco, and have just kind of built on old technology, and now is layering on an acquisition and trying to bolt that into old technology. And so there's a significant issue or problem around architecture when we're looking at the way that packet-based routing has been done in the past, and how that plays into a cloud-based world. So when we look at legacy infrastructure, we're looking at a very, again, it's a packet-based component, or a packet-based world of where everything was very linear. Everything lived within 4 walls. You knew exactly where one router was and where the data center sat, because you controlled that infrastructure in and out. And it was very simple. You knew how to troubleshoot it. There was simple monitoring tools back then, leveraging CLI in order to get in and troubleshoot everything within the data center, within the applications that are being used, and the server infrastructure that's sitting there. And when we built this out, you had your users and you had the users, the desktops, everything living in, again, within those four walls. You were either in an office or at the headquarters. But all of that was connected through traditional route switch or route-based or packet-based routers, as well as traditional firewalls. The server infrastructure a lot of times was HP, starting out with the ProLiants back in 1993. 1993 seems to be a pretty interesting year for technology and kind of the changes. But HP was very innovative at that time in 1993 with their ProLiant servers. And then you had the storage that's built into it. Backup, disaster, and recovery was essentially done through disk and tape backups for the most part. There wasn't anything very, I guess, very significant in that regards. You just had a structure and kind of the course that you went. What that does to an organization that is still trying to marry that legacy path into the cloud-based world, it's almost taken a MacGyver approach to the essentially paper clips, duct tape, and shoestring in order to try to pull all of these technologies together and take your old world and bring it into the new world. It's not cloud ready, expensive to operate. You've got a bunch of middleware or integrations, API integrations that you have to continue to manage and monitor and maintain. You have a lot of the vendors, again, this is where these tech giants have come into play. Initially, they were very innovative. You had Cisco as, again, an innovator in 1993. HP, they've always been an innovator from the old world, whether it was printers, whether it was servers, whether it was desktops, what have you, they've innovated. And in the server world, they started that in 1993 with the ProLiant servers. And kind of built this new way of thinking around the server infrastructure and how you did applications. And then you're stuck with any of the big three carriers, the Verizons, the AT&Ts of the world, these 3-year telecom agreements where they can take on everything for you, your circuits, your network, your routers, managing those routers, being able to provide you voice, whether it's a PRI, whether it's a BRI, whether it's a T1, whatever the connectivity component. These 3-year telecom agreements were very large, and they became very costly and not very flexible or nimble when you wanted to make a move or a shift within your technology spend. Wasn't very, the innovation is lost within this legacy path. And again, labor intensive. You have a significant amount of silos within your resources. You have network teams, you have data center teams, you have voice teams, you have operations teams, you have security teams. All of these components, hopefully they all speak to each other, but more times than not, you've got folks throwing things over the fence or blaming. A lot of times people just blame the network, whether their voice isn't working, whether the applications are slow. All these components play into that. So when we look at architecture, and I use a Toyota Prius and a Tesla as an example for architecture matters. When you look at the Toyota Prius, a great car for if you want to save on gas, but they didn't do a lot of innovation. They layered a electric capability over the top of a gas architecture, and built that appropriately. And again, great for saving on gas, great for driving in between different places and not having to have a costly gas bill or a petrol bill. And this is kind of where the Tesla came into play. And Tesla took a different approach to it. They didn't want to just build on top of old technology, kind of what Cisco continues to do within their architecture. They've got old route switch technology and layering over any SD-WAN player that they acquire or build. So Elon Musk takes a different approach to it, and again, the quote, "Technology breakthroughs require clean sheet designs." He started from the ground up and built a car how you would want a car to be built. And so as we look at how do you approach a cloud-first world, you're going to have to take that, you're going to have to approach that with a different architecture or a different mindset. As we look at today, what is an app-driven architecture? So the past or the legacy world looked at bits and bytes, ones and zeros, and you knew exactly where that data was going in and out. You knew where the bookends were. And so when we've gone into this new world, this world's literally driven by applications. And so when we look at that, the business users, they're not looking at bits and bytes. They're looking at, is my application working? How is it performing? The new slogan today is slow is the new down, because you're not necessarily down anymore, but you do get degradation and slowness. And so when you're looking at the architecture, you've got to take into account that what drives this is the application. And so when we look at the different components, nobody cares who your carrier is. That's a commodity item. It's a race to zero, as we typically say over here. Is connectivity is a race to zero. And again, we don't need expensive MPLS architecture anymore, because of the fact that the technology and everything that we're doing within the cloud doesn't lend itself to using MPLS. And so when we're looking at how we architect this, we look at the connectivity, cheapest possible. Obviously, you got to have, it's got to do a decent job, but you can buy multiple connections at a very low price and be able to connect those into, as long as you have the right architecture from a edge device perspective. It doesn't matter what you've got plugged into there. And then you've got your actual applications. How are those applications communicating back and forth? How secure do they need to be? What do you have running on those? Is there personal information that needs to be protected? Or can an organization or can an individual go straight out the internet, straight from their branch location? And then we look at where the applications live. Do they live in a public cloud? Are they native applications in the cloud? Are they a SaaS application? Whether it's Zoom Phone, which is making pretty good headway here in the United States, typically known for Zoom meetings, but continues to innovate and change. Is it Microsoft Office? So is there a productivity suite that's being leveraged? And then we look at private cloud, because, and I always tell people this, if anybody comes into your office and tells you that they can move all of your infrastructure and all your applications in the cloud, you've got to just frog walk them out of that, out of your office, because not every application can live in the cloud, and you're going to need a private cloud for some of those applications, and that's where those data centers come into play. So when we're looking at this architecture, as you can tell, I don't really necessarily talk much on the technology that supports the applications. Yes, it's important, but we'll get to that in a second. Essentially applications are king at this point. And so when you look at that, you've got to take that into account, because the business leaders are looking at applications. All they care about is their performance. So we'll talk about how do we get to that performance component? How do we support that? So the first thing you have to look at in order to do this is identify your people. a lot of the Fortune 1000 customers we're working with today, or the Global 2000 customers we're working with today, uh, they've got a huge focus in on how they hire their people. They're looking at less on folks that are used to physical boxes and start looking at things as infrastructure as code or network as code. And and a big component a big component of individuals' resumes are wrapped around scripting, or things such as Python or Ansible workbooks, or those components that allow for automation. And you're seeing a lot of these typical hardware individuals that are shifting into this automation, or this almost code type of a scenario, or programmer perspective, starting to um, look at CI/CD pipelines. So if you don't know what CI/CD is, continuous improvement or continuous development, and this is where you're looking at and leveraging agile frameworks or agile methodologies in order to continue to iterate. So knowing that nothing is ever perfect and you're always doing an iteration. And so this is kind of where that cloud infrastructure has come into play. When you look at Salesforce and what they've done in order to innovate and change the model from where Microsoft in the past, when you got your Microsoft disk or your operating system, those always were coming in every 12 months. There was a full version upgrade, and then in between there was dot upgrades or dot improvements within there, and that's kind of changed, where there's these iterations that are occurring every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks, depending on how often they're improving and developing. So this is where you're going to focus in on people. The people component is very important, because if you don't have your team in place, everything else doesn't matter. Your processes, your technology, none of that matters if you don't have the right people on the in the seats in order to drive this innovation. Another component that you'll want to look at from a people perspective is um, is separating out an automation team. So having a very focused automation team that all they do is deal with automation, because as you're growing as an organization, you're going to need to be able to scale. In order to scale, you have to have automation, especially with how the cloud is going. You have to be able to support that infrastructure. And so on the left-hand side, you're looking at essentially engineers, great engineers, very smart people, much smarter than myself, doing a lot of keep the lights on KTLO, or keep the lights on focused activities. And typically they're not they're more reactive as opposed to proactive in driving innovation in the organization, and they're very project focused. And in the future, you're going to have more of what I talked about, is more of DevOps components, where network folks are going to be moving into more of a DevOps role, and driving everything from a code perspective as opposed to a hardware perspective. The other component that needs to be looked at is the process. So once you have the people in place, you're going to need to look at your process. How are you vetting out technology? A good friend of mine always says that technology is 6 months to stupid. And what he means by 6 months to stupid is that you have to get a technology scout that identifies and vets disruptive, innovative tech. And this is where they're not just looking at Gartner and looking in the right-hand leader quadrant for every technology, because those organizations aren't necessarily innovating anymore. But being able to identify and vet out those technologies, not just on how great of a technology they are, or it's the next shiny object, but if it's truly going to impact the down the road model, looking at how the organization is funded, because funding is very important for the growth and the longevity of an organization, or whether they're going to be bought. And then also looking at the people and the culture. So identifying those that's a lot of work in order to do that. We're meeting with technology vendors on a regular basis. We're usually tied in with venture capitalists or venture capitalist organizations that focus in on tech, as well as we're always just listening to our customers. A lot of times we get recommendations from our customers about what tech they're looking at. They typically have a beat on things as well, and so a lot of times that trust and that relationship between us and our customers are built off of us going back and forth on different types of technologies and organizations that are popping up. The other component that you have to look at is how do you manage the burden of those technology vendors? And I'm not just talking about uh, evaluating the vendors, but more of once you have the vendors in, whether it's on the circuit side. So like I said before, circuits are a race to zero. So being able to make sure that you're nimble and flexible enough to, if you find a circuit that's $200 or 200 euros or 200 pounds, wherever you sit today, and in 12 months you notice that it goes down and it's now $100, you don't want to be locked in for 3 years or locked in because of the technology you chose or the type of circuit you chose, and being able to be nimble and move away from that. But you need an organization that can manage that burden, so that you're not having to go out there every single time, because your job is to focus on the core of your business, the enterprise that you work for, and not necessarily dealing with the chore stuff. The chore stuff, leave that to folks that are doing this on a day-to-day basis, and focus on the core components, because these are all ancillary components that, again, race to zero. Avoid one of the other things I recommend to all of our customers: avoid long contracts, and this again is that change in the distribution model of the resellers, the VARs, the system integrators, the OEMs that you usually work with. They want you to get into long contracts. They want you in 3-year contracts. And as a technology scout, my goal and my what I'm out to do is to build relationships with these long-term relationships with these customers and the individuals there. Honestly, more than just the customer, because these individuals, most CIOs, most IT directors, VPs of IT, are there for 5 years, and at an organization, maybe 5 years if that's kind of a longer term perspective. Typically 3 years, and I want to build a relationship with these folks because they're going to be moving to other organizations, and we want to be able to help them wherever they go. So avoiding long contracts is key for us, because it builds that trust in the relationship, knowing that we're not here to lock them in. We're going to continue to do the work. We have to continue to innovate and continue to change, and that's why procurement CI/CD is what I call this. And then you got to find folks that are pleasant to work with. Life is short. We don't need to work with folks we don't like working with, or that are jerks. So we always look for a good culture, of whether it's on the customer side or the vendor side. We're always looking for good people that we just like and enjoy being with, or even be able to grab a beer with at another time. The other piece that is very key is automation, and I say that not necessarily just focusing in on playbooks and scripting, but when you're looking at automation and other aspects of your business, automation becomes a key foundation for everything you make a decision on for technology. If their technology doesn't have an ability to do things from an automated perspective, through scripting and through playbooks, you may want to think twice about that technology. And so we've always prided ourselves on being able to look at the technology on the back end and set that up for our customers because of the fact that they can automate and they can do things through scale. We have customers that have 10,000 locations. They have to automate. There's no way they can do these onesie twosie things. And so when we're looking at that, automation becomes key. But then you also have organizations that they just want to go to market fast. We've got gaming organizations that have to go to market and change on literally on a dime, or kind of turn on a dime in order to service their customers. Same day, same hour, same minute in some instances. And the other component that you want to look at is investing in your individuals. So automation becomes key, but this isn't something that you just you're born with, is knowing how to do automation. There's boot camps, there's training. You have to invest in your people. And then the other component is AI ops. I talk about AI ops and I joke because AI, or artificial intelligence, is a very cliche or overused terminology and typically not used appropriately. So we joke within 3Tree as ML is written in Python, or machine learning is written in Python, and AI is written in PowerPoint, or artificial intelligence is written in PowerPoint. Because as you're looking at that, do know that AI ops is typically machine learning, or AI anything is typically machine learning, not always, but typically. But AI ops, so jumping into AI ops, this is wrapped around IT ops. And so when you've got your IT help desk or your operations team that are supporting all these technologies and the people in your organization, you have to have a ability to detect and remediate quickly. And any issues, outages, slowness, performance, this is where the business gets pissed. This is where or gets angry when applications aren't behaving appropriately, or at least how they expect. And so being able to detect things quickly, detect issues quickly, detect anomalies quickly, detect slowness quickly becomes very important. And there's different ways of doing AI ops. We're big fans of a company called Big Panda, Open Box Machine Learning. Check it out. It's a great resource and a great tool and application. And all they do is make monitoring tools, change management tools, architecture within the cloud just work better within your operations team. So all of those components get correlated into a help desk side of the house. But again, that's for another time. And so now that people in process, and obviously you'd think I'd focus in on technology first, but you have to have your people in process in place. Otherwise, technology just becomes a shiny object, and you have folks that have the purse strings getting angry when that technology isn't implemented appropriately or even implemented at all. So jumping into technology, after you've gotten people in process kind of cared for, at least in process, or doing that in parallel, you'll want to look at, there's 3 components within the technology space that simplify and provide the capability to connect back into or enable a multi-cloud strategy or connect back into your applications. One is AI SD-WAN. The SD-WAN has been going through a lot of evolutions and iterations. I have an article that goes through Gen 1 and Gen 2 SD-WAN and talks through this, and there's another one that's going to be coming out wrapped around AI SD-WAN as we're starting to evolve into leveraging machine learning to provide a more autonomous WAN, or a more autonomous software-defined network. And then the connectivity, as everybody's aware, 5G has a lot of promises. There's a lot of components that are coming out about 5G. One of my IoT and mobility lead within my organization, Chris Moeller, talks pretty heavily on 5G. He's got a background in it and continues to innovate for our customers and build out really interesting what he calls as science projects in the IoT space. But connectivity is a key component, and when you're looking at that, 5G obviously will be playing a huge part in that. And so when we look at connectivity, AI, SD-WAN, again, find technology scouts that know SD-WAN. This is a very large landscape, and all of the collateral looks exactly the same. And so unless you know this space well, it's hard to navigate. So find technology scouts that know this space really well. The other component is once you've identified the people to help you, the next thing is POC a lot. We've found that even with even the neatest and coolest technology in the SD-WAN space, you want to vet out that technology in your environment, because every environment is just a tad bit different. And this piece is important because this is going to be your foundation for how your organization communicates, whether it's a work from home individual, whether it's at the branch office, or whether it's a headquarters office. Obviously, the landscape continues to change in this crazy year of 2020. But again, POC a lot. And then you have to look at managed services versus internal teams. This plays into finding the right people, and this can be an augment to help you not have to wait until you have the right people in place before you change out your technology. So you can leverage managed services while you're identifying who you want in your internal teams. And the managed services component brings a bit of insurance or confidence back to your business as it's managing your network. And you also have another third party that you can hold accountable to keeping your network up and the SLAs high, and the uptime taken care of, and the performance that the line of business and your leaders expect. The next component is wrapped around network security, especially with folks moving into a work from home model. The old way of doing network security is not going to work. You can't put a firewall out at every single one of your employees' locations at their home address. You can do it at your branch office, but you can't do it at the home address. And again, setting yourself up to be able to provide connectivity and access and the expected performance out to these clouds, especially when you don't control the network, you don't control the connectivity out at your employees' houses, whether it's broadband, whether it's 5G, whether it's LTE, whatever is connecting them back into the internet, you don't have that control. So this is where a next-gen security, or a SASE type of a model, which stands for Secure Access Service Edge. This piece is important in a lot of cases, more important than a lot of the other technologies that I'll speak about today, because of the fact that this provides the ability to have integrity of your business and protecting your brand. Because the last thing you want is a hacker coming in and taking over, essentially. So what you have to look at here is whether it's cloud-based. We're big fans of Zscaler in this regards. They were born in the cloud. They've built their model in the cloud, and they're best of breed in this market, or in this segment. And they have an open API. They connect into almost any SD-WAN player, pretty much any SD-WAN player that is out there, whether you're looking at Palo Alto's CloudGenix, and I know Palo Alto has Prisma access, but CloudGenix connects straight into Zscaler. Whether you're looking at 128 technology, they're going to be there's an intent to acquire them by Juniper as it sits today. Whether you're looking at Ariaka, looking at you've got VeloCloud, but I always look at Velo as a Gen 1 SD-WAN. I look at Viptela as a Gen 1 SD-WAN, and if you I'll put it in the additional notes, but you can read that article, kind of the difference between Gen 1 SD-WAN, Gen 2 SD-WAN, and kind of that evolution of where SD-WAN is going. And then the other component is day 2 SecOps. So security operations, you always have to look at, you should have a security operations. You should have a process, an SOP that you can go back to. And so again, this goes back to looking at the right technology, identifying what works for your organization, and deploying it and making sure it works with the other technologies. This third and last component is one that came out of discussions with a CIO that I work with pretty heavily, and we've now leveraged this component more so than the other two components to help organizations enable themselves for a multi-cloud strategy going forward. So the technology is a cloud on-ramp. And I use this term because of why, because I use this term because of what it's doing. We leverage Equinix pretty heavily in this space, mainly because we're in the Global 2000 and the Fortune 1000, and most of our customers have a global footprint. And so we have to use Equinix because they are the largest provider of layer 2 backbone, as well as they've got 230 or 250 plus data centers across the globe that we can use as points of presence in order to have a quick layer 2 backbone on the back end and connect into pretty much any SaaS application, any cloud, public cloud, private cloud, what have you. We can connect into there through Equinix and not be pigeonholed into any one specific cloud. So we usually recommend our customers and push pretty heavily, and I do it because of the fact of a multi-cloud strategy. Even if you don't have it today, you more times than not, you're going to have it in the future. So I recommend you leverage a cloud on-ramp. There's more than just Equinix, but Equinix is our favorite. Do not go direct to clouds because that does pigeonhole you. And again, it's future-proofing you for a multi-cloud strategy. And so what that looks like, and this again comes from Equinix, so I can't take credit for this, but this is kind of the direction that Equinix has taken, and you'll see on the right-hand side, you've got all of your clouds or your SaaS applications that a enterprise would be hooking into. What this does provides you a pivot point and an on-ramp to get to wherever you want to go. And you do it, and they're connected straight into these, into any of these clouds securely and fast. And then they also have pretty much every single carrier you can think of connected into their POPs. So when you're looking to leverage, if you do have carrier contracts, you can leverage those. But the fact that they have so many there gives you options. So again, race to zero on connectivity. This is one of those components where you have options. Equinix has connectivity. Everybody's connected into them from an application perspective as well as from a carrier perspective. And so when you're connecting in, this becomes a key component of your architecture. Again, architecture matters when you're building this out. And so what you get from an app-driven architecture is being able to be cloud first. We have one customer that we work with that it was fairly comical when we met with them. They're a very large Fortune 100 customer with 28,000 locations across the globe. And when we met with them, they had goals and hopes to be cloud first, or at least that's what they claimed to be. But when we talked to one of the engineers, he had a deck that was created just for the leadership, where he indicated that they were actually cloud last, and they had multiple hops through multiple data centers in order to get to an application, which became very costly from an MPLS perspective, as well as they have latency They have applications not performing appropriately. They have slowness to them back to their branch locations. And Cloud First is one of those components where if you build the architecture correctly, you truly can be cloud first. Modularity, this is important. One of our friends within a Fortune 500 company got me onto modularity. He used to be known as Mr. Cisco, and he also only used AT&T at one point in time. He made a shift as he was looking at this change within the cloud mentality and cloud methodology. And within modularity, the way that you build things is with best of breed. This gives you options and flexibility. So when you build it, knowing that technology is 6 months to stupid, you can, at any point in time, if there's a better SD-WAN or better widget or a better cloud service, you can pull that out without disrupting your without disrupting the rest of your technology spend and the rest of your architecture. So if you have it appropriately built out, for one, it saves you on money because you can pull it out if there's something cheaper that does exactly the same thing. But also if there's something better, you can pull that out and put something else in. I thought it was genius. A simplified deployment, again, this goes back to automation, and I won't touch on that too much more. The other piece breaks the 3-year cycle. I talked about telecom agreements being 3 years. A lot of times these are very costly. You have a total contract value that you have to meet, otherwise you get fined for not meeting those numbers. I used to work in the telecom space. I know that we did that pretty heavily, regardless of how large of an organization you were. This breaks that 3-year cycle across any one of the tech giants. So you're not married to any single tech giant. Speed to market is a huge component, especially with everything being very competitive today, or being able to pivot and shift with any market changes. Obviously, 2020 has been the weirdest year that I've had being alive, and being able to shift and move is very important because you never know what's going to come down. Nobody would have guessed 2020. And then operational simplicity. This again goes back to one of the components I talked about, AI ops. When you're looking at managing and maintaining your infrastructure and being able to report back to the business and keep the business up, because all anybody cares about is performance and uptime, and being able to provide that. This provides you operational simplicity. So appreciate everybody's time on here. But if there are any questions, I'll sit on for another 5 minutes, and you're more than welcome to pop any questions in and I can answer those. But again, thank you for your time. Thank you for understanding how this landscape has changed and how to essentially make your network cloudy.